one of my absolute favorite personalities inside this crazy world of professional wrestling. He was a vital piece in the success of the legendary Heartland Wrestling Association. From referee, manager, authority figure, promoter, owner, he has seen and done it all. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jaxon Breeze. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Wow, what an introduction.
Well, again, thank you for joining us here, Mr. Breeze. And, you know, growing up in the Cincinnati area, I thought I knew all there was to know about the Heartland Wrestling Association. And boy, I could not have been more wrong at this point. Preparing for our sit-down conversation and really diving into the promotion's rich history. And I quickly discovered the HWA. It could be the focus of an extensive documentary series itself. And to try to cover all of that in a single sitting, that would be absolutely insane. So today, I wanted to sit down with you, and we're going to cover those so important early years in the HWA, and as it was picking up steam through the hotbed, the last boom of professional wrestling, the Attitude Era. So, Mr. Breeze, let's start in the beginning. Let's start with the main man in charge, the focal point there in those early years of the HWA, the legendary Les Thatcher. We're going to jump into a bit of his resume here in a moment, but out of the gate, how would you describe Mr. Thatcher back in the mid '90s when you first met him?
To be honest, I knew very little about Les when I first met him. But some of the guys around me, like Brady Labor, which was GQ Masters was his ring name and stuff back in the day. Guys like that, they were the dudes that I was around in the early days were encyclopedias on wrestling, and they knew all about Les's backstory and stuff. I was at the time I was at a place called NWF, Northern Wrestling Federation in Cincinnati, and they brought Les in as the head trainer there. And those guys all knew who he was from Smoky Mountain and all the other stuff that Les had done over the years and stuff. Plus, he wrestled with everybody who's anybody. If I'm not mistaken, he gave Ric Flair's debut match was against Les Thatcher, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah. And he brought Les in, and right away, compared to the trainer that we had previously, difference of night and day, and just the way Les explains and talks about wrestling is just unbelievable. His knowledge is just ridiculous.
In the interviews that I've seen with him, he seems very hard-nosed, old school. Is that it kind of reminds me, maybe of, that grandpa. It's really set in those old ways that could be a bit scary at times. But there might be a softer side in there.
Without a doubt. It's if nothing else, it's just part of his generation of it, his age bracket. And like you said, it's like somebody's grandpa set in their ways, and this is the way it is. But after being in this for 25 plus years and stuff, early on, everything Les ever said was gold and spot on, and you were a fool if you didn't listen and follow him. But the way he gave it to you was a whole different thing. And if you didn't grow up around grandpas like that, it was pretty rough on some of them guys. It was hard for them to hurt their feelings. And, nowadays that's a big deal. So that's the old school way, that's the only way. After doing this for 25 plus years, I see every inch of why Les did, why he did it, the way he did it, and everything.
Well, a little bit on that resume of Les Thatcher. We talk about an incredible career in the ring that started on a Monday, July 4th in 1960. Mr. Thatcher was a standout in tag and singles competition. This is pretty incredible. Mr. Thatcher is credited with helping develop the first pro wrestling T-shirt, and he also helped publish the first color edition of then the WWF magazine. I thought those were pretty cool. Some fun facts to throw out there. He also had great success away from the squared circle in bodybuilding, and he was a very accomplished on the NHRA drag racing circuit with just countless trophies and awards there. One of the things that really jumped out to me just prior to founding the HWA, you had mentioned this. He was working as a commentator in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And I think it's interesting there that, he is working for Jim Cornette. And I know it's almost impossible for anyone in pro wrestling to forget the name Jim Cornette. That's going to come up a little bit later in our conversation. The HWA itself, it is founded in 1996. As you said, you had some, you had your toe in the water a little bit there in professional wrestling. You're with the NWF. Let's talk about that transition for Mr. Thatcher and yourself exiting the NWF, the Northern Wrestling Federation, which was founded in '94. What was that transition like?
Oh, at the time it was it was pretty rough, especially on guys like Les and Johnny Diamond. Johnny Diamond was who owned NWF at the time. Really nice guy, really great guy. I later down the road after HWA, I actually owned another wrestling promotion, DWA, with Johnny Diamond. But I'd only been in the business a couple years when all this went down. And like I said, Les was brought in as the trainer there, but from what I understood, Johnny got behind on payments to Les because Les, of course, was getting paid to train people there, and everybody there was paying dues to Johnny to train there and everything. But apparently, there was a discrepancy on pay and stuff. And next thing we know, we showed up there one day for training, and the doors were locked. Couldn't get in, and couldn't get a hold of Johnny. Later found out that he had a couple of his closest inner circle guys take the ring out of the building and hide it and relocate it. I don't know. He was afraid of Les or something. But anyway, we all started training out in a buddy's yard way out in the middle of the boondocks out in Claremont County. A couple days a week, we'd go out there and train in the guy's front yard because he had a ring out there and stuff. And one day, Les came out, heard we were out there doing that. He started coming out there and giving us pointers and stuff. And one day he sat down with mainly Brady Labor and a few others and myself, and then got all the boys together. And we're like, well, if Johnny was running a school, I was the trainer with my knowledge of the help of everybody here. I think we can do this ourselves. What do you guys think? And kind of how HWA was born out in the middle of a country field.
You've talked to me previously about this, and before we got recording today. When you came in, there was one way into the business, and that was the hard way. No matter what your job was, you had to cut your teeth inside of that ring. Can you talk about the regimen early on? I know you've told me it was 4 to 5 days a week. It was grueling. But what exactly did training there with Les Thatcher and all the others involved in that early success, what did that entail?
Yeah, no matter what you were going to do, whether you were going to be a referee or ballet manager or wrestler, everybody trained the same, which is a very smart way to do it. And we trained 4 days during the week, or 3 days during the weekday, and Sundays was mandatory. And once we got going and were established and stuff, we started running shows. We had shows on Tuesday night, and every Saturday night we had an away show. We had our arena show on Tuesday night, what we called the Tuesday night showcase. So we were in the ring four nights of training and then 2 shows a week. So we were hitting it hard, and training was a whole lot of cardio. You, of course, learned basic bumps at the beginning, and everybody got sectioned off depending on with different people according to their level, and you got stuck with a different person. They'd been, even Les worked back then. Les got in the ring with everybody.
But you guys are often running here the training academy main event, correct?
Yep, Les Thatcher's main event training camp.
You got the training camp going here. You had mentioned that you're already touring. What areas of the Cincinnati territory, what arenas were you running in as your away shows here?
Well, that was later on down the road. As I said, first couple of years we didn't. We were mostly training. Sorry about that if you could hear that.
That's quite all right. It's fascinating to see the rapid growth here for the promotion. Just kind of as you said, just starting out of necessity.
We started doing a few armories here and there, but and like in '98, well, Brian Pillman, he rolled his Hummer at one season and was out because of an ankle injury, and he started rehabbing it at HWA because him and Les went way back, and they were really good friends. Brian was a super nice guy, and he'd come in after our trainings and train one-on-one with Les and stuff.
Okay, you're good to go.
We are back. Obviously, we had a little bit of technical difficulties there. Mr. Breeze, you were mentioning the involvement between the HWA and Brian Pillman. I want you to hold that thought just for a moment, because we're going to talk about Mr. Pillman when we get to the memorial shows. But you did mention in there a key year, 1998. And that's where things are really beginning to take off for the HWA. You said you're on the road here, getting a lot of attention, notoriety. Also, though, on the local scene in Southern Ohio in 1998, your old stomping grounds, the Northern Wrestling Federation, they have a new head honcho. One Mr. Roger Ruffin also has a tremendous resume with inside professional wrestling. This becomes a rather intense promotional war here on the streets of the Queen City. Can you tell us a little bit then, what was the feeling like between those two sides? And can you share any of those battlefield stories?
Well, it of course it began because of the discrepancy between Johnny and Les, and when Roger took over the company, Johnny stayed on board for quite a few years after that. But because of that, they wanted nothing to do with us because of Johnny and Les. So their guys were told, whatever you do, you're not allowed to be at their shows, work with their guys, no matter what. And that was pretty much the same thing that was told by Les to the guys at HWA. You don't work with their guys. If they work for them and you go somewhere and work, you don't work with their guys. You don't do nothing with them.
I think it's
on for a while.
I think that's pretty interesting, because I mean, you're seeing this play out on the independent level in Southern Ohio, and it almost mirrors what you've got nationally and globally between WWF and WCW at the time. The heated Monday Night Wars. So this has got to be pretty upsetting for many of the talents. I mean, individuals that you had wrestled alongside of, brothers in the trenches and all that. And now you have these clear lines defined where it's you select one side or the other. How was that amongst the boys?
It was rough because, you had guys that, like when I came on board at NWF, it wasn't even called NWF yet, but you had guys that were there before I came. So, they were very loyal to Johnny. So they stayed there. Guys like me that had just been there for a couple of years, we went ahead and went to Les because, one, we got locked out and we didn't know where to go because we weren't part of the inner circle. So we went out there and we ended up forming HWA. So we were loyal to what we started. You know what I'm saying?
What was it, especially then? You still have where the promotions are very territorial, and you had mentioned now this is when you guys are starting to expand outward and getting away from just the arena shows.
Yeah.
What was the competition like competing with a promotion like the NWF for spots at the armories or local different halls, or partner with sponsors and associations?
Yeah, we ran a few different armories and shows that were spot shows, but like I promoted in Fairfield, the National Armory there on Sims Road for years, and then we also had like up at Montgomery County Fairgrounds and stuff. But the Fairfield show in particular, I had been promoting that show for a couple years, and then all of a sudden, and everybody's supposedly big about all this territory and don't step on toes. And the next thing you know, right down the street at the UAW hall, all of a sudden, NWF is running a show the week before our show. So you got those kind of wars that got going and stuff, and like they'd show up, they'd post that their show was the week before ours. And to be honest, a lot of people that watch wrestling and go to independent shows don't have that much extra money. So then the fans have to start picking and choosing because they can only take their kids out to one. So do we go to NWF or do we wait a week and go to HWA? Kind of depends on which week did they get their paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of just wanted to mention it on that bigger picture, for those individuals that might not be, familiar with or in our region, but this really speaks volumes and can hold true throughout independent wrestling, especially at the time. for, no matter what the area, promotions just trying to get that foothold in their area, and some of the strategies that were employed of how you sell tickets and where you place events and all of that. I would say around this time, though, that the HWA, it begins to emerge as the front runner. And that's in large part due to an accomplishment that many out there might not be aware of. And even if they are, it's still so hard to believe. Not only did the HWA have official working relationships with both WCW and WWE, but you could go to an HWO show or an HWA show under that banner, and you could see both promotion stars working on the same card. How the hell did you guys pull this thing off?
As we were talking about before, the Brian Pillman Memorial events, that's exactly what made that happen.
Well, excellent. What a no better time here. Let's go ahead and jump into the Brian Pillman Memorial shows. As I said, these are run right in the middle of the Attitude. You guys are bringing in stars from WWE, WCW, ECW. This is all pretty much around the admiration and appreciation, respect towards Pillman himself. I have to believe this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I got to, when he was rehabbing his ankle at HWA, I would get to see him on occasion because I'd be in the office and stuff. Like I said, he'd come in after everybody had finished training and do one-on-ones with Les and stuff. But he'd usually show up a little early, and he'd talk to the guys and stuff. A little bit quiet, but really nice guy. You'd have never known he was a superstar, an ex-Bengal player and a big star at ECW and WCW and now WWE. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was just salt of the earth, and everybody loved him. So when he passed away, and Les made a few phone calls to some of Brian's closest wrestling buddies and mentioned that we were going to do a memorial event to raise money for his children, that way they had a little something to fall back on, because in wrestling there is no insurance, there's nothing to fall back on. It's paycheck to paycheck, week to week, and stuff like that. Even if you're drawing a good paycheck, you know what I mean?
Well, and of course, today, Brian Pillman's son, Brian Pillman Jr., blazing an amazing trail of his own throughout the world of professional wrestling. So back then, obviously these memorial shows are brought on because of the tragic loss of one Brian Pillman. And believe me, being from Cincinnati, Brian was obviously that connection, the Bengal striped trunks and all that. Being a hometown kid, he was my hometown hero, someone that I early gravitated towards in professional wrestling. So, I mean, it deeply affected so many from inside the business to the fans. And this is a way locally to give back, to help take care of the family. Pretty impressive. So you're pretty much saying, Les just gets on the phone here and reaches out to his friends, and in turn, those talents go to their individual promotions and say, hey, we're doing this. We're moving forward. I mean, that's just so, it's crazy to think about that, on the first Pillman Memorial Show, your main event here is Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. So they're just pretty much going to whoever, it might have been there, Kevin Sullivan or maybe an Eric Bischoff.
Steve Austin was there.
You have Austin involved. So they're all saying, okay, we're going to be here.
Yeah, we had guys, like I said, once that guys started, it spread like wildfire as far as word. And then the office said each promotion found out, and they went to the boys, told them what was going on. And everybody, the offices all contacted Les. And they, for the first time in the history of pro wrestling, territories, companies no longer mattered. Anybody who wanted to work on that show had the full approval of their offices from ECW, WCW, and WWE. And if they wanted to, they were more than welcome to go. Yeah, and they came in droves.
That's just incredible. I had the pleasure. I was there in attendance, in the audience for the first two Pillman Memorial shows. The first one, actually, we're just celebrating the anniversary. Some 22 years ago, it was April 29th, 1998, from the Norwood, Ohio Middle School. From there, after that first year, we saw this tremendous boom. You guys moved over to the famed Cincinnati Gardens, which had hosted so many tremendous wrestling events over the years. Let's real quickly look at some of these names here. Obviously, I just mentioned you had Benoit and Jericho main eventing the first event. Else throughout here, you had the names Al Snow was a regular, Road Dogg, Mankind, D'Lo Brown, Conan, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Sean O'Hara, Tom Pritchard, the Harris brothers, Vampiro, Diamond Dallas Page, just incredible. I mean, it just goes on and on. Randy Orton. I mean, this is a who's who of who in professional wrestling. They're all coming together here under the HWA banner.
Yeah, Ric Flair, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Terry Taylor.
Wow. With so much of this, you have to have so many fond memories. Can you share any of those stories that really stand out in your memory with us?
They're I was just asked this on a recent podcast, and really didn't come to me till after the podcast what the number one memory would be, because when you're exposed to that, like I tell everybody, I was a lucky SOB to get involved in pro wrestling when I did and where I did, because you can't, it's just ridiculous. And the number one story I would have to say, or moment for me, which is probably one of the things that gives me the most credit and credibility in this business. At the Pillmans, I was in charge of transportation, which meant if any of the talent coming into town, they had to contact me before they got here so I could schedule picking them up at the airport and getting them where they were for all 4 of the events the whole time they were in. So I would take Benoit and Jericho to work out when they were in town. And we would cruise around in my private van, and I would get to work out and pick their brain. But the number one moment would have to be when I took my van to the hotel and I picked up Ric Flair, Terry Taylor, Dean Malenko, Steamboat. I'm trying to think. There might have been one more in the car, but because I was trembling, dude. It was like, I can't believe this. I am in my van and I'm driving with these legends and icons and the stuff these guys know and have seen. And I got to pick their brain that whole day, driving them around Cincinnati and stuff. And I got to do that for all 4 of the Pillmans, and I got one-on-one time with all these legends and icons and at the time current stars and stuff, and got to spend a lot of one-on-one time with these people and pick their brains and learn their psychology and stuff. And Dr. Tom Pritchard, he came to him. Plus we later had the contract days when Dr. Tom was there, and hearing him talk and Les Thatcher talk, you can tell all them guys are cut from the same cloth. Unbelievable, the knowledge, and I got to soak all that up like a sponge for years.
Wow. Going back to those early days when you're training with Bone Crushers, the Northern Wrestling Federation, I mean, did you really envision or dream that you would be in a situation, a scenario where you're surrounded by just not at that point, even legends at that point, but then so many up and coming, soon to be breakout stars?
I wouldn't have thought it if I wouldn't have thought that any of that would have happened in 20 some years or 30 years of me spending my time in professional wrestling at the time, to be honest. And then it all seemed to happen so quickly. HWA was only running for a couple of years, and then, after a couple of years, the Pillman, and then after the Pillman, the next 10 years was just a snowball and just took off.
Incredible. But, on top of the success with the Pillman Memorial Shows and bringing all of those major promotions together under that one umbrella, the HWA also had working relationships, was a development territory of sorts for both WCW and WWE. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about each of those situations, each of those promotions. Let's start off with WCW. This begins in the 90s, correct?
I'm trying to think. No, it would have been because it was after the Pillman events.
So it just came after the Pillman. So that really opened the door to beginning the work with the major national, the global promotions.
Yeah, that plus we were already some of our guys were getting to go down to OVW and work out and stuff.
Well, that would
Andy Davis and stuff, because Les was real good friends with them. So some of the HWA guys would get to go down there, which, you know, it gave us another in with the feds and everything, because Les so tight with them, plus the guys in the offices at the other major feds, and that's the developmental territory and everything. So that kind of helped open the door for the developmental deal too.
Would that have been, that would have been with the WWE, WWF, WWE partnership.
You
With
know,
the with WCW, it seems like it was a little bit more short lived and maybe happened prior
yeah.
to
It was for, I think, if I remember right, it was like 3 years that we were developmental for WCW, and the only reason that went away was WWE bought WCW.
Oh, okay. So that's how those things kind of that dissolved there in that partnership. That's pretty interesting. One of the things that stood out to me is, you know, they are turning to HWA for some assistance in developing these talents, but they're also operating their own training facility in the power plant. How did that partnership work out? I mean, how did they decide, okay, we're going to assign certain talents to the HWA? We want them studying under the tutelage of Les and his crew, or the homegrown there in Atlanta?
I really don't know. That would be more Brady and Les's department that would actually know why people got sent where they did.
Very, very interesting. So I did have it on here. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to dive into kind of what caused the breaking up, you will, between WCW and the HWA. So in reality, it was pretty much just that this is when WWF had made the purchase here. You do have that working relationship with WWF, WWE. You mentioned the close ties to OVW. Was your guys' ability to reach out and bring in some of those talents, was that in large part into the working relationship already established between Mr. Thatcher and Cornette?
Yep, and Danny Davis.
And Danny Davis as well, the, you know, the founder of OVW. And of course, that around 96, I believe, is when they established their working relationship with the WWF at the time. I had found this was pretty cool. We're talking about the stars that had come through the HWA. You're looking at a Shannon Moore, Victoria, the Hardy Boys, the Haas brothers, Charlie and Russ. And what really jumped out to me, speaking of Russ, I found footage from a September 2001 episode of HWA TV, which features Russ taking on a young prototype, John Cena.
Yeah.
Even he had graced the HWA.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
was,
John was awesome to have in the locker room anytime. He did a bunch of different shows for us at the HWA Arena for the TV show that we had back then. Plus, we used to do the occasional casino show over in Indiana and stuff, and John came and worked some of those. He was one of the best dudes ever to have in the locker room because he was a card. He was a cut up. He just kept everybody in stitches.
yeah, you've heard even so many people when they speak of when he shows up at OVW, the professionalism, how prepared he was, the dedication. I mean, he was absolutely committed, that drive, that desire, that fire for greatness, which he would eventually achieve. All of these other names that you had from WWE, WWF working with you. Again, you talked about the memories from the Memorial Show. What are some things you could share with us from working with these such young, raw talents that you would see become household names at the time? Anything that really jumps off the page to you?
Even back then, especially now, you know, after being exposed to the talent that I had been and stuff at that time, you could tell guys like when John Cena or somebody like that came into a locker room, you could tell just by the way they dressed, looked, and carried themselves. And then once they started talking about wrestling and the psychology and this, that, and the other, it was like you could tell right away that guy's going somewhere. He's going to make some real money doing this.
Simply incredible there. WWE now, they go full fledged. Obviously, OVW is that development territory for New York and all that. It looks like their involvement with HWA it's rather short lived. Maybe after a year and a half. What caused the withdrawal from HWA talent being, you know, HWA being able to use WWE contracted talent? What caused that, the breakup there?
Well, we never really lost the ability to use them. Just
Or I guess
lost the ability to have them for the developmental guys for free and everything. But I honestly don't know the exact truth to why the contract, the developmental deal got pulled away. I
outside
can only
of
speculate and state on rumors, and I hate to spread speculation because there's enough that goes on in the world today.
rumors and innuendo. Now,
Yep.
financially speaking, was it just like a talent loan that was so important to the HWA? Obviously, you go like for an outside, even to the arena or an outside show, you put up, these future stars of WWE are going to be here. I mean, you're going to draw audiences there. Was there any other kind of financial support from the WWE? Did they give you guys like rings or different equipment,
Yep.
training equipment that you could use, or just flat out write you checks or anything like that?
Oh yeah, we got a monthly payment like when WCW was the developmental deal. We got a ring from WCW, and then we got paid a monthly fee for training their guys and getting them ready for TV. And then when Vince bought WCW, a lot of their guys that came over from WCW that they didn't know what they were going to do with yet, like Natural Born Thrillers, Mike Sanders and Jidrak and all those guys and stuff like that. And Matty Anoy, who was later a superhero in training, Big Matty and Eddie Fatu and guys like that, and Lance Cade and all them guys, they got sent to HWA because they just had so much talent. They didn't know what to do with all of them. And all those guys got sent to us, and we ended up with getting one, maybe two WWF rings when that happened.
Wow.
And then WWE started paying a monthly fee for us to be, to cover some of the costs of training their guys and stuff like that and getting them ready for TV.
Now
That's
obviously
basically what
this
developmental is fine tuning guys, getting them ready for TV.
very, very nice. Obviously, this is a significant financial boost for the HWA. Was there a bit of hardship or difficulty moving forward when you suddenly have those financials withdrawn from the company? How did you guys overcome a hurdle like that?
Actually, sure, it hurt. Anytime you lose that kind of supplemental income, it hurts, and it made it tough to get by. But we were already before the developmental deal. Our guys at HWA were top caliber wrestlers and entertainers, and we were already drawing good on our own. When we first got the contract deals, our attendance, of course, went up because everybody heard, oh, there's WWE guys and WCW guys at HWA. We got to go see. But, after a while, the newness of that and being able to see them every week kind of died out locally. And so we were back to drawing, and in a matter of no time, you'd be surprised. We were back to drawing our regular numbers. And it was only hit or miss on when we would draw really over 500 guys. You'd think we'd be drawing 1,000 people per show with those guys being on the shows, but it wasn't like that.
Amazing, and it's just so incredible. It speaks the volumes of the in-home training program to build those local stars. And I just don't know if it's of me being local and having access to all the incredible content from the HWA, but absolutely some of my all-time favorites were local, homegrown HWA stars. Mr. Breeze, I mean, you provide so much incredible insight. And as I said at the beginning there, it's so much to cover in one single sitting. I feel like we barely scratched the surface here. Luckily, you've agreed to join me again, maybe next week or absolutely in the near future, to really dive a little bit deeper. And one of those topics we're going to talk about are those homegrown talents. We're going to look at them individually and what they have meant, not just then in professional wrestling, but still to this day. Kind of talking about names like a Sammy Callahan, Eli Drake, John Moxley. Those are just to name a few of many that we're going to talk about going forward.
Yeah, the Butcher and the Blade, formerly Pepper Parks, an HWA original. Nigel McGuinness, HWA original. BJ Whitmer, who's in the office at AEW, another HWA original. Like I said, we had guys like that when the contracts got signed, and you had Cody Hawk, who's the only third ever Trainer of the Year for Cauliflower Alley Award, which is huge, you know. And we had guys like that when we got the developmental. And the developmental deal, you know, like I said, when we had that, we had Dr. Tom and Al Snow and Raven and guys come in like that to help with training. But some of our guys were still running the trainings for the regular guys and stuff and sitting in on those. So the HWA guys, they all carried their own.
I was gonna say, with so many names, we're gonna try to hit as many as we can in our second sit down. And, you know, back then, man, I remember I would have bet the house that Pepper Parks was going to become one of those iconic names, headlining WrestleManias.
Yeah.
Just had it all, everything put together. Such an incredible talent. We're also going to talk about, have a little fun when you guys went national, made your debut on MTV. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I got some interesting questions for you there. Then, of course,
I can get you in contact with the guy who was the star of that to tell you the whole story too, just so you know, Mr. Rory Fox.
Well, he was kind of thrust into that spotlight because they had other plans that didn't work out. So they had to in transition there to Rory. So we're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about the run through the 2000s, you know, ultimately, not necessarily in a negative fashion, but the fall of HWA and how it's evolved into now what we see in Southern Ohio and in professional wrestling and all of that. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about that evolution in 2020. Today's landscape, you're involved with a tremendous promotion, Future Great Wrestling. In so many ways, FGW embodies the philosophies of the HWA. Can you let our listeners know where they can learn more about Future Great Wrestling?
On Facebook, search out Future Great Wrestling on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. Make sure you go there and subscribe to their show Shockwave, which has a lot of exclusive content. With the shutdown and everything, luckily they've got enough content that wasn't ever put on the episodes, that they've got new episodes every week still going, and we still have people working behind the scenes to add other types of exclusive content to keep everybody ready for when we get to run back and get things hopefully back to normal and everything. So make sure you check that out. Every Wednesday night, they upload a new episode at 7 p.m. on YouTube Shockwave. And that's pretty much it. And when things get back to normal, you can come check them out every Friday night at 190 North Brookwood Avenue in Hamilton, Ohio.
Once again, thank you, Mr. Breeze. I look forward to talking with you again next week, having you back on as soon as we can here on the Hot Tag WrestleCast. But right now, let's hear it from a word from our sponsors, the War on Morons podcast.